Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Kabbalah on the weekly portion. And we have actually a very, very beautiful shir tonight on the subject of the flood. In fact, the title was the Kabbalah of the flood. And I'd like to start the shir this evening by asking an age-old question. And it's a question which many Ma'amori Hasidus, many Hasidic discourses ask. Lahavin inyan yuridas hanashama la'olam hazeh. Why did the soul come down to this world? After all, the soul was basking in the divine radiant light in the Garden of Eden before it came down to this world. And it comes from such a high place and descends into such a low place. For what purpose? And not only that, here in this world, we're beset with challenge. We're beset with the difficulties of making a living, the strains and the stresses of earning, the combating forces of commerce, the rat race, the daily struggle to put bread on the table. How is it possible in such an environment that one could connect with the divine? How is it possible? It seems we are so handicapped by the milieu in which we find ourselves. How is it possible that we can experience something which is, if you want, even greater than what we had previously? And yet we have a rule that every yerida, every descent is for the purpose of an ascent. So what possible ascent is there in the descent to this world and its mayim rabim, its raging waters? I use that phrase because it's a phrase which King Solomon uses in Shir Hashirim, and he says, "Mayim rabim lo yuchlu lechabes ava," that these raging waters cannot extinguish the love that a person has for Hashem. Unaharos lo yishtafuha, and rivers can't wash it away. Im yitin ishes kol hain beisoi ba'ahava. If a person would offer all the wealth of their home to take away this love, he would be despised. People would laugh at him. What are you offering wealth for for this love? This love sustains and thrives beyond the mayim rabim, the tremendous raging waters that we are beset with. How is this possible? How does this work? What's the dynamic? How can we keep our heads above the water? Some of us just manage to tread water. Some of us go under. But how are we expected to fight? And where do we get the strength to be able to thrive amidst these tremendous floodwaters? And of course, of what possible advantage is there in this environment over the menucha, the tranquility, and the basking in that beautiful light in the Garden of Eden? This is a question which is posed in so many of the Ma'amori Hasidus, the discourses of Hasidus. And of course, we're going to correlate it with this week's Parsha, because in the Parsha, we have the whole idea that Noach is found to be a tzaddik, and Hashem tells him to build a teva, to build an ark, and to take all the animals in the ark, his family within the ark, and the whole world is destroyed. And what is fascinating is that Hashem destroys it with a flood. After all, there are many ways, harbe drachim ushluchim lamokim, there are many ways which Hashem, if he wanted to, could destroy the world. Could be with fire, it could be with instantaneous death, plague, Why was water chosen as the medium to destroy the world? And Noach had to enter and build this ark in order to survive. Why? And how does this relate to our contemporary condition? What lesson can we learn from the story of Noach and the Teva? So let's start with a beautiful Pirush of the Baal Shem Tov, a beautiful explanation of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov explained that the word Teva, which means an ark, also in Hebrew means a word. And consequently, when we say, Boi el ha-teva, come into the ark, that is an imperative, not just then in the days of Noach that he had to take his family and all the animals into the ark, but this is an instruction to us. If we want to survive the raging waters of this world, we have to enter into the Teva, the word meaning the words of Torah and Tefillah, the words of learning and the words of prayer. Because those words, the Teva, the words of Torah and Tefillah, are what will carry us above and beyond these raging waters. And then, when we enter into these words, the Mayim Rabim, the tremendous raging waters of this world, will not be able to extinguish the love which we have. What is fascinating is that these flood waters are called Mei Noach, the waters of Noach. The word Noach actually comes from the word Naicha, which means tranquility, from the word Menucha, like we have on Shabbos. In fact, Noach brings tranquility, calm, and rest. The floodwaters, paradoxically, bring us to a different, higher level. How is this? So we're going to, this evening, go on a Kabbalistic journey into a meditation, which will help us transcend these floodwaters. First of all, let's have a look at this idea of shibud haparnosa, the difficulties in making a living and correlating them with floodwaters. They're all around us. We apply for jobs. Sometimes we get rejected. Sometimes there's tremendous competition. Sometimes we get done in business. And sometimes business is not going well. We haven't got the customers. You've got a pandemic. And the markets just explode, implode, go everywhere apart from where they should be going. And there's anxiety. We're anxious. Where is the next penny coming from? Now, this is real stuff. How do we deal? How do we cope with all of this? And of course, how do we fit all of this in with our Yiddishkeit? Surely it detracts from it, not adds to it. And yet Chazal say astonishing statements. They say in Pirkei Avos, in the Ethics of the Fathers, Yofa sha'achas b'teshuva u'masim tovim ba'olam hazeh mikol chaye olam haba. Better 1 hour of teshuvah and good deeds in this world than the whole of the world to come. Although the world to come is stunningly beautiful and spiritually a Gan Eden, a Garden of Eden, but nevertheless, down here you can actually get something which is even greater than the whole of the world to come. What is it if we're faced with the raging waters of making a living? How can we even think and sort of keep our heads above this water? The answer is that we need to go into the words of Torah and Tefillah. And we need to meditate. So let's start a simple meditation by way we can lift ourselves above. The Gemara says that every single blade of grass has a mazel which makes it grow. Now, when we're talking about the word mazel, usually we translate it as luck or mazel tov, being lucky or congratulations. But in fact, technically, the mazoles are the constellations in the sky. And spiritually, in fact, the sustenance of every single physical item, every blade of grass, comes originally from the mazoles. The mazoles feed in and give energy to the blade of grass. The mazoles themselves, in turn, are fed by the ayin sorim. It says in the higher worlds, there are 70 ministers. In fact, each nation has a spiritual minister in the higher worlds, which gives energy to that nation. So, for example, we're sitting here in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has a sar, a minister in the spiritual realm, and there are 70 of them. Those ayin sorim, in turn, receive from the waste of angels called oifanim. These angels oifanim, in turn, receive from higher angels. And so does it go higher and higher until everything is received from the sephira of Malchus of Atzilus, which means the mouth of God. Now that's an anthropomorphism because God doesn't have a body, but nevertheless, in the sephirotic array, we refer to the sephira, the 10th sephira of Malchus, as the mouth of God, because when God said, and let there be, etc., this is the idea of the tremendous contraction of infinite power into finite creative packages, rather like the process of speech where thousands of thoughts are distilled and contracted into a few words. And that comes out of the mouth of God, which is called the Sephira of Malchus, Malchus Per. Malchus in the physical body, which is a reflection of the image of God, is the mouth, because a king rules with his mouth. And the idea of kingship is the idea that there is the king and there are separate subjects. So when we think of God as a whole, there's nothing outside of God. Ein oid milvadei. If we want to speak about God as he rules over the world, then we apply the concept of king and subjects. If you have a king and subjects, then the king rules by way of edict, and that comes forth from the mouth. And hence, all the blades of grass which receive from the mazoles, which receive from the 70 ministers, which receive from the waste of the Ophanim, which receive from higher angels, ultimately all receive from the Sephira of Malchus of Atzilus. Now, that is what is said in Ashrei when we say Malchuscha, Malchus kol olamim. Your Malchus is the Malchus of all the worlds, because everything in the world stems originally from the Sephira of Malchus. What is fascinating, however, is that what emanates from the Sephira of Malchus is only what's called a ziv ve'ha'ora, a ray, a fraction, like a ray out of the sun. And in comparison to the sun itself, it's negligible. It's considered as nothing. So although Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, as far as we are concerned, is way beyond our experience and a true delight in reference to our experience, However, ultimately, the experience of Gan Eden is only a ray out of the true essence and infinite nature of Hashem. And consequently, therefore, although for us it's great if we could divest ourselves of the physical body and enter into Gan Eden, and of course, when we pass from this world, that is what is necessary. We go through a change of formatting in the sense that we need to stop processing through the parameters of this world and recalibrate into the parameters of the next world. It's rather like, imagine you're an Android and you're changing to a Mac. You've got to learn a different operating system. Well, similarly, going from this world to the next world, it says you've got to forget the chezu, the high alma, the look of this world. So you're not going to wake up tomorrow in Garden Eden at 11 o'clock in the morning and drink coffee with biscuits. That's not going to happen. You have to completely recalibrate into a different form of experience. But it's very important to do that, which is why Kedai, it's really worth it to go through the purification process, whether it be the immersion in the river called Nahar Dinur or Gehinnom, to get to Gan Eden. Because in Gan Eden, one can bask in the perception of the divine light. However, ultimately, that is only a ray of the divine. However, when one realizes that's only a ray of the divine, then one actually wants the king himself. Why suffice with a ray of the divine when leshta'ava begufa de malka, in the words of the Zohar, one wishes to take the king himself? Now, paradoxically, when you're in Gan Eden, you're quite blinded by what we call giluyim, by revelation. It's where there is a situation of darkness that in fact you desire the very essence. In fact, this is what's called the yisran ha'oir mitoich ha'choshech, the advantage of light that comes specifically from darkness. Paradoxically, it's specifically through descent to this world and a person being presented with the tremendous raging waters of this world, that here a person can, from the darkness, think and come to the recognition that in fact all of this originally stems from only a ray from Malchus, and what I want is in fact the divine essence himself, which is the love we express in the Shema of Ve'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha b'chol nafshecha u'v'chol ma'odecha. That love of b'chol ma'odecha is the love which can be generated when a person is in a situation of hipuch, of opposite. The Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, was often quoted as in a state of dveikus, when he was in a state of tremendous, intense spiritual connection. In fact, he would sometimes fall to the ground out of tremendous devotion. And he would say in Yiddish, Ich will sehen gar nicht. I don't want to see anything. Ich will nicht dein Gan Eden. I don't want your Gan Eden. Ich will nicht dein Olam haba. I don't want your world to come. Ich will mehr nicht dich allein. I just want you. It can be compared to visiting a palace. I once visited Buckingham Palace, and visitors are allowed in right through the palace at a certain time of the year. That's one of the advantages of living in London, where we have still a monarchy. And going into the palace to see all the various rooms and chambers as one went further into the palace. One is dazzled by the tapestries, by the art, by the sheer architecture, by the opulence of each and every room. And the truth is, as higher you go, you can't imagine there's something even better than this. And you may be content to stay there. However, the truth is, you have to go into the best room, which is, of course, the throne room, where the queen sits, although the queen's not there, or she wasn't there when I visited. And when you get into that room, then you actually realize you've got the king himself. To suffice with any of the side rooms would be like visiting and being okay with seeing one of the ministers. But as the Midrash says, Ano Nosiv Malka, I actually want the king himself. And this is what the Alter Rebbe said. I don't want to be dazzled or, if you want, distracted even by the ray, the fraction of light. I want the very essence. And that is what can be accessed specifically here in this world, paradoxically, amidst all the travails of this world. Let's explain that Kabbalistically. It's fascinating that the human being eats food. And we need food to live. And without food, we don't live. The food doesn't need us, we need it. And the question is, why is that so? The answer is, Kabbalistically, because the source of food is in fact higher than the source of our soul. In the chain order of creation, there is a world called Tohu, and then a world called Tikkun. In the world of Tohu, there was the Shavira Sakelim. We have explained this concept previously. In essence, the idea is that in the chaotic state of the world of Tohu, each and every element wanted all the light for itself. So in terms of Or and Kli, light and vessel, each vessel wanted all the light for itself in a very egocentric desire. And because there was huge lights and small vessels, the vessels smashed, and the shattered sparks of those vessels descended ultimately down into this world, becoming extremely hidden within the material nature of this world. And hence the Kabbalistic concept of birurim, of elevating spiritual sparks from this world. And the sparks are within the material of this world, as in the food. So when we actually eat food, we are elevating something to its higher source. Now, the nefesh habahamis, which means our animal soul, is in fact also rooted higher than the godly soul on one level, because the animal soul comes from the world of Tohu, whereas the godly soul on one level comes from the world of Tikkun. And that's why the lights of Tohu are stronger than those of Tikkun, which is why the animal soul can prevail over the godly soul. And yet, when a person undergoes this meditation, enters into the words of Torah and Tefillah, the ark, which can carry them above the raging waters, what they realize is that the ultimate source of the animal soul is in fact coming from the world of Tohu, and that when it is elevated can raise a person to an even higher level than the soul was in the Garden of Eden. In other words, in the Garden of Eden, the soul is in the world of Tikkun. When it comes down to this world, it is enmeshed, but given the opportunity to release tremendous spiritual energies And it's those energies that lift a person to a level of Avas Hashem b'chol mo'idecha, of loving Hashem with all their resource, which in fact gives them this love of the very body of the king, not a mere ray from the king. And this is Mei Noach. These are waters of Noach which provide tranquility. So let's put all that in contemporary perspective. That means to us as follows. Often people think, if I would be detached from the world, if I would be, let's say, locked up in a yeshiva, and I would be studying and praying all day, then my prayer would be effective. However, how me as a business person, as somebody who has a job and who works, who's very much enmeshed and engaged in the material world, how can my prayer be effective? Says the Baal Shem Tov, Boya Lateva, if you want to be lifted up above all the waters, and in fact it says Vatoram Hateva, that the ark was lifted 15 amos, 15 cubits above all the waters. In other words, by entering into the words of Torah and Tefillah, one comes to the highest of all places. That is achieved through specifically being in the darkness, and from there one desires and wishes the very essence of the king. That is, it's because of one is in the extreme of the darkness that you have the advantage of light in that place. And it's not a desire for any ray or for any fraction, but it's of a desire of the very essence. And that is the Yofa Shah Achas. That is the advantage of this world, where 1 hour of teshuvah and Maasim Toimim in this world is better than the whole of the world to come. Because at the end of the day, the whole of the world to come is a mere ray and fraction of what there is. Whereas the teshuvah, the return from the darkness and the tremendous yearning for the body of the king, the Ava B'chol Mo'idecha, is even greater than what you could have in Gan Eden. And hence we understand the purpose of descent, and we also understand the tremendous utility of being in this world. We also can understand the concept of a mitzvah now. The Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, says, No'ot techiloson b'soifon, v'soifon b'tchiloson. The beginning is wedged in the end, and the end is wedged in the beginning. That means as follows. Hashem wedged the highest will and desire in the end in physical mitzvahs. In other words, he put specifically in this world, in your wearing tefillin, in your wearing a talis, in your lighting your Shabbos candles, in your keeping kosher, he put the highest will. He took the beginning and wedged it in the end. And although in terms of giluyim, in terms of revelation, you may not be privy, or in terms of grasping consciously, you may not have a revelation of all the tremendous revelations that there are in the higher worlds. However, what you do grasp down here is the essence. And the reason you grasp the essence down here is because the end is in fact wedged in the beginning. And consequently, the tremendous opportunity of being in this world needs to be understood, never underestimated, and of course, valued. Every single minute in this world being of tremendous potential. You can get something down here which you cannot get in the higher world. And even though paradoxically it's of greater challenge and of greater darkness, but you can generate greater light from that darkness, which you couldn't have beforehand. Now, in the story of the flood, Noach is told to make a window for the ark. Soihar tasa la teva. Soihar, tzadik hey reish, is what he should make for the ark. Now, in modern Hebrew, and even in biblical Hebrew, the word for a window is a chalon. Chalon. Why do we use the word here, tsoihar? And what is a tsoihar? Rashi, in fact, brings two interpretations as to the meaning of a tsoihar. It can mean either a window or a luminant stone. That means that there was a stone in the ark, like an LED light, which Noach carried around. And of course, Rashi does bring that second interpretation, because the first is difficult, because if it was raining so much and it was so dark and so on and so forth, what would help a window? What daylight was there to bring into the ark? And of course, at night, how would Noach see? So therefore, Rashi brings a second interpretation that it was a luminant stone. The Tzemach Tzedek brings an unbelievable interpretation into these words, which has fantastic relevance to the situation which we're in now. And he says like this: every three-lettered word in Hebrew, one can turn around or mutate the letters in the words. So I give you an example. Shabbos, shin, beis, sof. Change it round, it can read Tav Shin Beis, which is the idea of tashuv, of return, because the essence of Shabbos is teshuvah, is returning to the pristine state, the elevation from the weekday and the coming back or return to one's spiritual essence. Soihar tzadik hey reish, meaning a window, can be read reish tzadik hey, which means ratza, which means he wants. It can also be read tzadik reish hey, which is sora, meaning a trouble. So the Tzemach Tzedek says like this: when a Jew is faced with a sora, a trouble, he needs to know that it's Ratzah, it's the divine will, in order to create a tsoihar, a window. And that is an idea which fits perfectly into our situation today. We have been maneuvered into a sora. This pandemic is something which we didn't manufacture. This is, if you want, we've been maneuvered from above into this situation. So it's a tzara, and we need to pray that we should get out of it. On the other hand, Ratzah, we understand that ultimately it's from Hashem. And what is the purpose? To act as a tsoihar, to act as a window. A window allows light in, a different perspective, a different opportunity. And then, ultimately, tsoihar means a luminant stone. That because a person has a different perspective, understanding, opportunity, they can give out light and warmth in a way which they couldn't do beforehand. Often when a person goes through a tzara, they can empathize with others, they can give warmth and kindness and advice to others because they've been through something which they understand, and hence can understand others who are going through it as well. So it's a growth process. And now let's put the two concepts together. Soihar tasa la teva, make a window for the ark. But we explained that teva means a word. Make the words of Torah and Tefillah the window and luminant stone that will carry you above the raging waters. In other words, we are in, at the moment, a difficult moment. But through our Torah learning and our prayers, it's possible when we enter into them to understand that we have opportunities in this world which are greater than the whole of the world to come. And everything that happens is bahashgacha pratis. Everything that happens is by divine providence. And if Hashem has maneuvered the world in this way, it means that we need to open our eyes and see opportunities, avenues of where we can do things and mitzvahs and get the world ready for Mashiach in ways that we actually didn't think of or do beforehand. That's how Hashem moves the world on. And consequently, through the sora, it becomes a tsoyhar, it becomes a window, and we realize this is the will of Hashem, so that what we can do is to shed more light within as a window and exude more light from within out as the luminant stone. So, to bring everything into a form of summary, Mayim Rabim, these great raging waters which we find ourselves in now, the true perspective which we should have a look at is, although they are formidable, they are ultimately there to elevate. They're ultimately there to be Noach, waters which bring us to a higher level than beforehand. We asked the question before, why did Hashem bring a flood to the world? The 40 days and nights of the rain corresponds to the 40 sora measures of water in a mikveh. A mikveh purifies. The flood purified the world. On a certain level, the challenges of making a living and of exhibiting faith above and beyond that purify a person. Let each one of us enter into our own words of Torah, our own words of tefillah, personally, communally, and let us find in those words connection that lift us above, that allow us to take the darkness and transform it into light, that allows light in and also gives us the power and empowers us to exude light out together with warmth and vibrance and chayas and energy. This is the teaching of Noach. And ultimately, same in our teva, we leave the ark. We go out of the ark, we go into the world, we re-inhabit the world, but we go into the world empowered and touched by the experience of the Torah and the tefillah which we have learned. When we have, if you want, embraced the very body of the King, then when we've had the V'ahavta b'chol mo'idecha, then when we re-enter the world, we re-enter it with a much greater clarity of perspective, seeing a garden of Hashem, where we, as the gardeners, need to reap fruits. What we need to do is to aesthetically keep it beautiful, and we need to prepare it, as our task is now, at this stage in history, to prepare ourselves and our communities and those around us for a different level of perception, as it will be when Mashiach will come. One final thought. In the ark, what was going on in the ark? The answer is Noach was running around feeding the animals. But what was fascinating was, it was a utopian era in the ark. In fact, V'gar ze'evim keves, the wolf shall live with the lamb. That which we say, a messianic utopian description of how things will be when Mashiach, actually happened in the ark. Because the wolf didn't eat the lamb, otherwise there would be no lambs left in the world. They lived together. But the reason they lived together then was because they had to live together. There was no choice. When the wolf will live with the lamb, when Mashiach will come, it won't be because of ein breira, there's no choice. It will be because we will see the utility in each and every facet of creation. We will see how one complements the other. We will see clearly how each and every creation has its utility, how each and every creation is complementary, and how, certainly in terms of mankind, how each one of us needs the other and needs to bring out the best in each other. And this is the concept of the one man, Noach, the tzaddik, entering in the teva and creating a beautiful new world. Keinti alonu, let us enter into our words of Torah and Tefillah, and then re-enter the world and create a new world, the world of Mashiach, b'mheira v'yameinu, amen.
Amen. Rabbi Dubov, thank you so much. I know myself, everyone that zooms in, and all those that watch, the hundreds and thousands who watch over all the different social media networks and platforms, we all appreciate and we all look forward to this year on our Monday night. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron, and best regards to your father.
Thank you. I will do it. And to all who zoomed in, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
God bless.